Welcome everyone. My name is Donald Lindreed. I work for WWF and it's also part of the Science-Based Target for Finance project. And I've been the project manager and the product manager for the SBTi Finance Tool that we are going to present today. We had two sessions yesterday, more user focused. Today we're going to take a much more deeper look into the technology. So this session is primarily focused on or aimed towards people with reasonably good understanding of Python and wants to integrate this solution into their own IT environment. So I have a number of colleagues with me today. Joris is going to present most of the agenda today, and Nate is going to give us an introduction on the framework, and Owen, who's here to answer your methodology questions. So just a few things for housekeeping. You can please use the Q&A box to ask questions. This webinar is being recorded. There will be a link to the recording emailed tomorrow, along with the slides from today's presentation. We're also simultaneously streaming over YouTube at this link in case you have any colleagues or friends that wants to join. You should have that link in your email inbox as well for the reminder for today's webinar. So the agenda, as I said, we first an introduction. Naturally, Nate is going through the SBTi Finance framework, and I'm going to do a quick overview of what the tool actually looks like from a user perspective and things that you can do with it and such. And Joris is going to jump into the technical tour. He's going to discuss the data connectors, contribution in terms of use, and then we're going to spend a couple of minutes on next steps, what we could do then, and naturally give hopefully a lot of time for Q&A. So let's jump straight into it. So as of yesterday, the Science-Based Target have managed to attract 1,009 committed companies that are committed to set science-based target. 486 of them have had their targets approved. Out of those 1,000 companies, 60 of them are financial institutions, which is obviously great since we just presented the framework for finance 1st of October. So no one has really had any chance to submit any targets yet, or actually really know what the criteria for submitting targets are. So with that, I will hand over to Nate to discuss the framework.
Thank you, Donald, and thank you everyone for joining today. This is part of a series of webinars that we're doing, and since this one is more focused on the technical specifications of the tool, I'm going to go very quickly through the overview just to give a little bit of context for this tool within the broader Science-Based Targets initiative. So SBTi was launched back in 2015, and we started a call to action for companies and financial institutions back in 2015. We had 10 financial institutions commit that year, but we've held them in abeyance until this month when we're finally publishing this framework that we've been working on for the past 2 years. And as Donald mentioned, we have now 60 financial institutions that have committed to setting targets, and we're eager to work with them on applying this tool and developing targets for their investment and lending portfolios. The next slide just shows the 4 components of the framework. All of these are available through the Science-Based Targets Initiative financial sector project website. The tool is obviously the focus of today's webinar, but we've also developed methods for Scope 3 target setting, more than 20 criteria for developing and assessing those Scope 3 targets, and then a longer guidance document that presents sort of a how-to as well as a description of all of these components. The next slide gives an overview of the three methods that we are focusing on at this stage in the project. These methods are physical intensity and engagement-oriented methods. So the sector decarbonization approach is a physical intensity method that the Science Based Targets Initiative developed back in 2015 and is applied across various sectors where there's a clear linkage. The SBT portfolio coverage and temperature rating approaches are new methods that have been developed to guide financial institution engagement and engagement-based targets, and those are what are covered with this tool today. So both of these methods are covered by this tool. The next slide shows the linkage of these three methods with the asset classes that we're covering in this phase of the project. And you can see that that physical intensity method is linked with our first three asset classes of real estate, mortgages, and electricity generation project finance. These are clear physical intensity pathways in terms of gram CO2 equivalent per square meter, for example, for buildings, or per kilowatt hour for electricity. And then the physical intensity approach is also one of the three approaches that we allow for corporate instruments. The other two methods are also introduced for corporate instruments. And this provides some flexibility for the broad range of corporate instruments that financial institutions are offering. The coverage here is clearly not comprehensive in terms of all of financial institutions' products and asset classes, or the methods that could possibly be applied. And this is by design. These are the methods that we have been able to develop and implement during this pilot phase of the Science Based Targets Initiative, which runs from this month, October, through April of next year, so for 6 months. We do anticipate development of additional methods, and we do anticipate reviewing those additional methods for inclusion and harmonization with this framework. The next slide provides just a very high-level overview of the criteria that we have published this month. There are more than 20 specific criteria and additional recommendations for financial institution targets. And these are quite essential for financial institutions in terms of developing and assessing their targets. So those are an important reference, and they're published separately on the Science Based Targets Initiative website for direct consultation, but they're also included in the guidance document. The next slide just gives a very quick listing of the case studies, which are additional to the guidance, where what we've done is work with a broad range of stakeholders throughout the past 2 years to method road test last year and to do beta testing of this tool this summer, but also to work with different institutions in terms of how they can actually apply these methods and tools to their own portfolios. What we've developed here, including the tool and the framework, are all oriented towards financial institutions that are seeking to support the Paris Agreement. And so you can see here the list of 8 financial institutions that have contributed case studies to the guidance document. And these are the methods that they're focusing on in their case studies. And then Wells Fargo, the US bank, was applying PCAF, which is a financed emissions calculation method. So for folks that want more information and a specific application of today's information, the Amundi case study and La Banque Postale's case study are both quite relevant. The next slide gives just a quick sort of what do you do if you want to actually set a target in your financial institution. And the first step is to read all of the materials that are on the project website, read through that guidance document. But then also, if you wish, you may publicly commit to setting a target. That's not a requirement. Financial institutions are also welcome to just submit a target without a public commitment. And that can be done through emailing targets@sciencebasedtargets.org to get more information. And thanks again for everyone for joining today's webinar, and I will pass it now back to Donald.
Yes, and I'm gonna just hand over the screen and the presentation to Joris, who's going to take us. Sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to talk to you about what the tool actually looks like. Sorry, a bit of confusion there. So what is the finance tool, the SBTi Finance Tool? So we started out as a project with a number of objectives for this tool. Nate just explained that the temperature rating and the portfolio coverage are included in this particular tool. And we wanted this to be an open source solution, widely distributed. We wanted it to be transparent to make sure that you can see exactly how this score is being calculated, and obviously not providing any black box solutions for this. We wanted it to be data agnostic, and this is important, so that you can use any type of data provider you want, including your own data lake if you want that, and if you have the data available. And we wanted it to be able to be integrated into any user interface, so either service providers or homegrown portfolio management solutions, for example. And clearly, we want this to be a workflow tool for portfolio managers and analysts and compliance and risk management, not to become a solution that you pick out from your bottom drawer every 12 or 6 months to fulfill some compliance obligation. But this is actually a tool that you can actually use in order to analyze your portfolio, and we'll go into that in a little bit of detail today as well. In order to develop this, we devised a team, obviously including the 3 main partners of the Science-Based Target for Science-Based Target Initiative for Finance, WWF, CDP, and WRI. And we engaged with an RFP process where we picked out Autic Finance and OS Climate to help us actually write the code for this. In order to be able to fulfill some of these criteria that we had, or the shopping list that we had for the tool, we engaged also and included a number of service and data providers in the development process. So we had at least weekly meetings with Bloomberg and CDP, naturally, ISS, MSCI, Trucost, and Argentum, who's all been very helpful in this development process, both in terms of making sure that the tool works with our data, but also that it works with our user interface, or how they want to implement these solutions. And to get the user perspective on this, we engaged with the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and had a couple of their organizations also sit in and contribute in the development team. So this is just a slide with some links where you can find more. I would encourage you to go and have a look at the analysis workflow example. It's a Jupyter notebook in Colab that takes you through both methodology and code at the same time, so you get a good feeling for what the tool actually does. So what can you use it for? Well, portfolio managers can naturally sort of analyze companies and sectors and understand how they contribute to climate change, and obviously measure a portfolio's temperature score, identify the biggest contributors for strategic allocation decisions from a portfolio manager, for example. More importantly, you can model impact of engagement on the temperature score in a portfolio, and therefore you can obviously then plan your engagement strategies to make sure that you get most bang for your buck when you engage with these companies. So this is a quick example of what the analysis could look like. So first, we obviously calculate some temperature scores. We're not going to go into the methodology behind that. If want to dig in deeper into that, please refer to the methodology paper, but also to yesterday's webinar where Owen went through the methodology in a bit of detail. We also have a dedicated methodology webinar from back in April when we first presented it. That should give you plenty of backup around and understanding for the methodology. And please reach out to us and ask questions in the Q&A today if you have any questions around the methodology. So we developed it, we calculate a temperature score based on timeframes and based on scopes. We aggregate those up to a company temperature score or up to a portfolio temperature score, which we see here, which is a midterm scope 1 and 2 target, and a midterm scope 1, 2, and 3 target of 2.6 and 2.9 degrees roughly, respectively. And also in this, we do get the portfolio coverage, and the portfolio coverage is essentially saying that these your portfolio includes, in this case, 35% of companies that have actually set science-based targets and have had them approved by the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And the difference between that, just to go into the methodology a little bit, is that the temperature score widens that universe quite a bit to also include companies that have set targets and announced them publicly, but haven't submitted them to the SBTi and haven't had them approved by the SBTi. But through the tool programmatically, we can assess those targets and see if they fulfill the minimum quality criteria to have them included in the temperature score. So that's a very important distinction between the portfolio coverage and the temperature score. The temperature score includes all public targets, or can include all public targets. The portfolio coverage only includes SBTi approved targets. So that score obviously doesn't do it. We obviously want a score that is well below 2 or a 1.5 degree in our portfolio. That's what we're aiming for. So we have a lot of work to do. We can do that by singling out companies where we can engage. And one good way of doing that is to produce a list of companies and their our ownership in those companies. And here we can see a couple of companies where we have pretty chunky positions in those companies. We own almost 5% and 12% of these two companies. All the data that you see in these examples today are totally randomized dummy data, so they have nothing to do with reality. Currently, not to sort of cash any companies out. And so we say, okay, let's focus on these two because they do contribute quite a bit to our temperature score, and let's engage with these companies. And we can do that through a series of scenario analysis or what if analysis for these companies. And in this case, we say, okay, what happens to the portfolio if we engage with these two companies and we manage to get them to set a 2-degree target, at least that's the bare minimum. And when we do that, we compare it quickly to the actual and then the scenario target. And as we can see, that target has been reduced a little bit. This is 2 companies out of a 50-company portfolio. So there's obviously a lot more work to be done. But what we can see is that we've lowered on a sectorial basis, we've had a greater impact on the portfolio score or on the sector score. And the solution here is obviously that if we want to reach that 1.5 or well below 2-degree target, we naturally need to do more engagement. But we can use this tool in order to identify where we can get most, where we can be most efficient in that engagement process. Finally, then, when you want to report, to the science-based targets. If you want to do that, that's obviously not an obligation, but to use this tool, you can naturally just use this for your analytical purposes as well. But we have devised a Jupyter notebook that helps you sort of through that process, which you find under this link here, the 5 reporting Jupyter notebook. That gives you first a sort of a report card that tells you what calculation settings we've used. Read the methodology around what those different aggregation methods and default score really means. But it also gives you sort of output of the portfolio coverage naturally, the temperature score, and also the how much of the temperature score is based on default scores and how much is actually based on actual targets that we have actually scored. Now, you obviously don't want to submit your own portfolio to the SBTi because you don't want to reveal your investment process or your current holdings. So therefore, you can anonymize all of the identifiers within this reporting notebook to make sure that you can send this data to us. We can still run it through the tool. We don't know what the companies are, but we can still check that all the numbers work out, and therefore we can more easily validate and approve your target. So to sum up, the science-based target finance tool solution is giving you analysis and modeling and reporting for alignment and target setting and engagement strategies. And with that, I do hand over to Joris. Sorry about the confusion before.
Thank you, Donald. Can you unshare? Then I can take it over. Yes, it's working. Hi there. My name is Joris Kramwinkel. I work for Tech Finance, and during the last few months, I was responsible for the technology bits of the tool. So what I will do today is give you a brief tour on what we built, give you a glance inside. So the tool caters for multiple use cases, and I want to get this moment briefly to touch upon the philosophies on how we build it. As Donald already mentioned, it's open source, and he also mentioned that probably like portfolio holding data it can be confidential. So in many cases, it's not feasible to bring your data to a centrally hosted model. So that's why we wanted to be able to bring the model to your own data, and we do that by using some cloud native technologies. And this is a very important paradigm shift. And in order to bring the model to the data, you can do that in various ways. So on the right side, you see kind of a Matryoshka doll of the architecture of the tool. Within, in the middle, you have the Python core. And Python is also one of the key ingredients. So why did we choose Python? Mainly because it's open source. We do expect some contributions from the community, and we don't expect quants or EHG analysts to be computer scientists as well. So the Python programming language is a low barrier programming language and easy to read. So that's why we choose for a Python core. So in the next slide, I will touch upon every dimension of the tool. So the Python core, the REST API, and the UI. So as I already said, Python is one of the key ingredients, and the REST API lives in a Docker container, which makes it able to run it either on your local machine, run it in your own infrastructure, or run it in a public cloud or centrally hosted elsewhere. So now I want to dive a bit into these three separate parts. So first of all, the Python core. So what I will do, this is kind of my base station link, but I will also show you a bit of my IDE and my browser. So I will switch screens a bit. The Python core is available in the official PyPy repository. So for the ones familiar with Python, you can just pip install SBTi and you're good to go. So when do you want to use this Python module? If you want to integrate the SBTi logic in your own Python code base, a good example of this is Bloomberg, which is currently building a bquant platform. It's kind of a Jupyter Notebook version of the old age Bloomberg terminal. They were integrating the SBTi package in there and make it available for their users. So that's the use case. Of course, if you have your own Python scripts or automation bits and pieces, you can include it in there as well. But for ESG analysts or quants, it's also very easy to play around with these methodologies via Jupyter Notebooks, as Donald already mentioned. So I put all the relevant links in there, but let me show you a bit where you can find more information on this Python core. So first of all, this is the documentation page. Links of all these tabs are available in the presentation. So here you can find all you need regarding technical documentation, but also about the usage. So the getting started with Python tab already directs you to Jupyter Notebooks. So you can launch Jupyter Notebooks very conveniently via Google Colab, or you can spin up your Jupyter Notebook server yourself. We do expect you to have an Anaconda Python distribution. It's not really necessary, but it's convenient because then running this piece of this line of code in your terminal will initialize the Python environment with all the needed packages. But if you don't want to go that route, please have a look at the Colab notebooks. So here are all the 5 notebooks available in the repository. So Donald showed some snippets of the analysis example. It's a very elaborative notebook with also a lot of text and guidance. We also have a quick example, and we have a notebook on the scenario parts and on portfolio aggregations. And it works really easy. If you just click the link, Google will do it for you. Here it renders the notebook. Of course, it requires you to install the SBTi package, and you can run all the cells by Control Enter or hitting the play button on the left. So I'm not going to do that now, but it's a very easy way to play around with the code base. So I also told you that it's officially available in the PyPy repository. Also here, it redirects also to all the links I showed you. The GitHub page is the so this repository, the SBTi repository, is the main repository. So this is also where we keep track of all the issues, if there are any. So if there are if you find an issue, please post them here in the issue box. We also have a Kanban board for the community to work on the items. So diving a bit in the code, I want to elaborate a bit more on the philosophy of building a larger application in Python. So we choose to use Python 3.6 And since as of Python 3.6, Python supports type hinting. And on top of that, we use Pydantic. And yeah, let me explain that with a little slide. So we know Python is a weakly typed language, which can be very useful. If you add two variables, it doesn't matter if the variable is a string or a float or an integer, Python will able to add these two variables. But working in an open source setting and working in a setting where the engine is reliant on data and the data can come from anywhere, it's very important that we make strict agreements on how this data looks like. So the code base is type hinted, but on top of that, we use Pydantic. And Pydantic is kind of a canonical way of writing Python. It's very common right now in the machine learning space. It's used for data validation. So in the GIF on the right, if you say if you want user data, then in the class you defined what attributes that user needs, and also what kind of types you would expect. And this is very useful. So I touch upon that later on when we talk about data connectors, but it really helps us in agreeing how data looks like. And it gives an interface for people working on it. So that on the Python code base. The REST API. So of course, if you want to integrate this in your workspace and you want to be it part of an automated workflow, it would be very convenient if you can plug in an API in your platform or ecosystem. So APIs are very common tool set now in the financial industry. So a lot of back office providers build their systems based on APIs. And being this wrapped in API allows to just plug it in any system. So what we did is we wrapped the Python module with Python Fast API and packaged it in a Docker container, such that it is easy integratable for platforms. So one example of that is, for instance, Urgentum. They couldn't attend this morning meeting. There will be this afternoon meeting elaborating on their use case, but Urgentum builds a ESG platform and is now embedding the SBTi API in their offering. It's also very convenient if you want to make your own web application on top of it. Data providers can use the API directly, and portfolio management systems. So in order to run the API, it's you need to have Docker. So the REST API has its own GitHub repository. It has its own code base. And in order to run it, you need, if you want to run it on a Windows machine, you need Docker Desktop. In Linux and Unix, it's already embedded. But Windows did a lot of great work in this space. So you don't even need Hyper-V anymore. They have something now called WSL2, where you can run Linux kernels on your Windows machines, which is very convenient. The Docker images that you need for this are also available at Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is kind of the repository where one can store Docker images. Yeah, we have two relevant images for you: the image of the API and the image of the UI. So the only thing you need to do on your side, if you have installed Docker, is run a Docker pull to retrieve the image. So I will show you how to do that. So this is the SBTi API code base. We prepared a few Docker Compose files for multiple use cases. If you want to run the API only, if you want to run the API and the UI on top of that. and for some development settings, or if you want to run it in AWS, we also have a tutorial for that. So what you would do is like pull the image like this. I think I have the latest version already. By default, Docker is already looking at Docker Hub, which is very convenient. And what you want to do next is in the README of this repository, we have a lot of examples how you could set this up. What I want to do now is to run the API, and I want to run the front end Docker image on top of that. So I just run the Docker compose file and say it needs to run and build. So now I locally have, I'm running the API and I'm locally running the UI to show you that. So the UI we built is purely for demoing purposes. It allows you to interface with the tool via Excel files. So you can, for instance, upload a dummy portfolio file, which are available in the documentation. And it just is a very simple UI on top of the API. So every field I have here translates into a field in my request to the API. So with this, I can calculate the scores. I have some visuals on the outcomes. Here in the logs, you will see that it did first it did a GET request to the API asking, okay, which data providers do I have available, and then it will upload the portfolio and it will ask to compute the temperature score. So that's what's happened underneath. So the API is also available on local port 5001. So there's also a documentation, so it's well documented. So as I told you earlier, we use Pydantic. That also allows us to auto-generate a lot of the documentation, and by having this in place together with Fast API, we get kind of data validation for free. So this is one of the endpoints the API has, for instance, the data provider. And then you get a list of the available data providers in your tool. But of course, I can also run API request on the temperature score, like the front end did. So the front end also is a nice tool to get to know the API a bit better, although it's very good documented. So much on the API, I think. So let me get back to the slides. See, I forgot to mention anything. Yeah, so I touched upon this while we use Fast API and the benefits of that. And I showed you how to spin up the UI. It's a multi-container deployment. You have the front-end container and the back-end container. Yeah, then next. So of course the tool is reliant on data, and it's data agnostic, so you should be able to plug in your own data source. So what if, for instance, you have your own data lake in a MongoDB or an SQL or whatever format you have? How can I include that in the tool as a data provider? I will show you how to do that. So in the code, we made an abstract data provider. It's within the SBTi module and the data submodule. So we defined how you would build your own data provider, and it actually has three important methods. The initialization. So if you need to have like a path set or URL to your SQL database or your Mongo database, or you need to pass through authentication settings, you want to do that here. And then it's really important that you implement these two methods, the get targets and the get company data. So you have like two types of data. You have fundamental data about companies, their company name, their maybe you have the ISIN, the company revenue, for instance. All these characteristics are what we call fundamental data. Now in this method, you would implement the translation from your source to what we expect, and we expect a list of data provider companies, and these classes are defined in the interfaces. So we need very strict use of these classes because many data sources will be implemented, and this is kind of the contract we have. So you can use the tool if your data is in this format. And to help you a bit with that, we also implemented the Excel interface or a CSV interface, and you can have a look at that if you want to build your own data connector. Now, in terms of contributing, so all the source lives in GitHub. We do have automated workflows in GitHub, for instance, to check the type hinting, to run all the unit tests, and also to evaluate if all the notebooks are running fine. So if you are working on an issue, or you're creating your own features, or you're creating a data connector for which you think that's useful for others as well, please create a branch in the repository, make a pull request, and then we will review it, and it maybe get merged back to the master. There's more details on how to contribute in the documentation. There's this contributing section. You can read more about contributing there. Also, earlier we received some questions on the terms of use. So we distributed the tool under MIT license with an SBTi copyright, basically saying you can do anything you want with it. If you want to have your commercial servers around this tool, it's possible. We do, of course, really appreciate if you make any adjustments or you make additional features to give them back to the community. We're currently in conversation with the one of the Linux Foundation umbrella projects regarding climate finance, and might be that they will govern the open source project and connect industry demanded features with resources. Yes, that's basically what I want to tell you about the tech bits and pieces. Can I give it back to you, Donald?
Yes, please. That'd be great. Thanks a lot, Joris. Let me share my screen with you.
I need to stop share.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So next steps, Joris took us through sort of the technical bits on how to sort of at least get started with implementing the solution in 3 different ways for you. What we should say is that you're not alone in this, because we do have a number of companies that can help you with this implementation. Ortec is obviously here on hand to help you with this from sort of a consultation perspective and such. But we also have data and service providers that provide data and also solutions around this. So CDP, Bloomberg, ISS, MSCI, Truecost, and Argentum are the data and service providers that can provide either sort of target data, emissions data, or fundamental and financial data. But also a couple of them are currently developing applications for this, Bloomberg and Argentum, and we anticipate more coming on later as well. Bear in mind that this is a fairly quick development process that we've gone through. We started this in late May. So these companies have obviously had their own sort of pipelines of ideas and products to launch. So we anticipate that they will follow once they've been able to test this thoroughly. So what I would suggest, though, is that you do go to this quite elaborative Google Colab Jupyter Notebook in Colab, which you have the link to here, which I showed you a few snippets from. That gives you a good understanding for what you can do with this tool and sort of how it works. And that sort of brings us to the Q&A session. And we did get a question around that, which I sort of already answered, but I thought it could be good for also to get to yours view on this. I'm not sure if you saw that, but the question was essentially, is it possible for someone who's not an IT expert and not familiar with Python environment, source codes, etc., to apply this tool? And I sort of recommended that either go to the Jupyter Notebook that I just referred to and have a look at that, but also that you can spin up the UI in the Docker container, which shouldn't be too difficult to do. It takes a little bit of skill to do that, but also that obviously the service providers like Argentum and Bloomberg are building solutions for this. Do you have anything to add to that or a different tack on that, Joris?
No, not really. No, during the beta test, we saw many users using the UI, which is very convenient if you don't want to see any line of Python code. But indeed, you need someone to set it up for you in your own environment or in a private cloud or in your local machine. But we have, in the documentation, we have written a guide to walk you through there. In the section on the REST API, so one should manage, hopefully.
Another question here that just came in is, who can I consult when I face technical problems using the tool? One way to do that, depending on kind of what problem you have, is the email address that you see at the bottom left here at financeandsciencebasedtargets.org. Another is naturally, if you discover bugs, to go to the GitHub repository and file them as issues there. Anything that you want to add to that, Joris?
Yeah, that we might open a Slack channel, but I'm not sure what the status is there, Donald. But that's
no, we haven't done that yet, but it's something that is in the pipeline that we're definitely working on. It's a little bit of an issue to keep that open as well and keep it clean. So that's what we are currently sort of investigating on how to do that. But we will announce that when that comes, obviously. So we have another question here. Is there a benchmark comparison table with your list of service providers showing the type of data and services they provide? Apart from the list that I just showed you here, the answer to that question is no. And you essentially have to reach out to each individual provider. I think it's fair to say that CDP doesn't sit on much financial data. I think the case is also the same for Argentum, that they are mostly focused on the emissions and target side. But we don't have sort of a comparison table around that for for commercial reasons, I guess, for these providers. So please reach out to them. We can supply sort of direct contact details so reach out to us if you want that, to people who are familiar with this project, because if you call their helpline, they may not always know what you are referring to.
In addition to that, Donald, in the technical documentation, we added a chapter on the data requirements, so you can see which fields exactly you need, which are required and which are optional, to maybe map them from your own sources.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good good point as well. Yeah. We do still have a few minutes left here. I don't know if we have any more questions just yet. Do you have anything else that you wanna add? Hey, yours, something that you think that you might have skipped over a little bit too quickly?
No, don't think so. Yeah, probably there are many, but
yeah. We could talk about sort of what the data inputs look like, I guess. If we go to, let's see, where are we in the appendix? We have, so this slide here is sort of describing what kind of data you actually need for this. So the portfolio data should be fairly self-explanatory. This is obviously your holdings in your portfolio with some sort of identifier. The ISIN identifier is needed in order to map this to which of these companies do have SBTi approved targets or not, and which is obviously important for the portfolio coverage approach, and not so important for the temperature scoring in this case. But weights and investment values. This in the column F here is where you set for two of this what if scenarios that we've built. You can identify specific companies that you want to engage with, and again, company names here are completely random, so don't get hung up on those. But this engagement target column here, true, is essentially saying that yes, for this particular case, we would engage with that company, and when we model that in the scenario analysis, then we would model this particular company doing that particular action that we hope that they would do. Financials and emissions data is what we see down here, which is naturally sort of greenhouse gas emissions and financials. So company enterprise value, total assets, cash, revenue, and a few more. And those are mostly for aggregation purposes. And then at the bottom here, you see a snippet of the target data that is needed, obviously. And the question then is, how much target data is out there in the market? And as we've been talking about before, you have 486 companies that have SBTi approved targets, and then you have another 4,000 companies. There is obviously overlap on those that have publicly disclosed targets as well. So yeah. Okay, so we have another couple of questions here. Like a stupid question, where is the portfolio tool? No, that's not a stupid question at all. So I would go back to this is essentially your link into the tool, where you find all the documentation, where you find the links to the GitHub repository and all that documentation, but you also have them linked here. So if you want to go straight into the GitHub repository and play around with that, www.sbti-tool.org takes you there, and to the documentation getting started, sbtitool.org is where you want to start for the technical part of it. But the sciencebasedtarget.org/finance-tool is sort of the main entry, and you will find all of the information there. Do only SBTi committed companies have ISIN? How do we answer that? I'm not quite sure I sort of understand the question, but the tool uses a table that is available on the SBTi website, sciencebasedtargets.org, /companies, committed companies or something like that. You find the link. It's fairly visible. Companies that are taking action, I think it's called, and they in that list, all the companies that are listed do have ISINs. We obviously have unlisted companies as well that have committed and set targets. So you will have companies in that list that don't have an ISIN for that reason. And since this tool is primarily aimed to be used for listed equities and tradable bonds, it's unlikely that you will have them in your portfolio unless you're running a private equity portfolio, but that is obviously possible. And then you need to map those companies manually to make sure that you get them included in the portfolio coverage. So that is currently the solution that we have. We're working on various different solutions in order to make that process a little bit easier. Should every portfolio of a company calculated based on the tool in order to allow the company to get approved by the SBTi? So I think the question is if every portfolio of a company calculated based on the tool in order to. So I think the question is that you're asking is in order to submit a target as a financial institution to the SBTi, do you need to use the tool for your portfolio? I think I'll let Nate answer that question. Do you have a?
Sure. The coverage of the tool is intended to apply to all of the portfolios of companies, of financial institutions. We do, in the guidance and criteria, have this table 5.2, which specifies coverage requirements of the targets per financial product. And so I would check there in terms of which products need to be covered, but in terms of the application of the temperature rating tool, it is intended to be comprehensive. I just also mentioned, one point that Iris made was around the MIT license. We're distributing this very freely and openly because we want all of you to take this and improve it. This is a very initial tool. It's sort of a first of its kind, and we do know that it can be improved and that you are the people who are qualified to help us improve this. So thanks for joining today, and any suggestions you have, we're all ears.
I think we can add to that as well. Is that, I mean, you're obviously free to use whichever method you want in order to sort of set targets for your equity and bond portfolio, as long as you use the 3 methods that are included in the framework, which is the SDA, the temperature alignment method, temperature rating method, and the portfolio coverage method that we talked about. I would say that for listed equity and tradable bonds, I think the portfolio coverage and the temperature alignment methods and those tools are the best implementation and the easiest to use for that. One very final question when we are 1 or 2 minutes past our bedtime. Will there be an Excel version of the tool? There is currently not an Excel version planned for this tool, I'm afraid. But you're more than welcome to develop that as an open source solution if you want. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and thanks a lot for your questions. Please reach out to us either through GitHub or through finance@sciencebased-targets.org and or the Slack channel that hopefully will be up and running soon. And you will get obviously this recording and the slides for this presentation emailed to you during the course of tomorrow morning, I would guess. So with that, good afternoon or good day, wherever you are. Thank you.